Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's Skeleton Crew reaction and review. We're going to be talking about episode 4 tonight in full spoilers. So make sure, again, if you have not seen Skeleton Crew episode 4, go watch it, come back, join us. It was only about a 30-minute episode this week, 35-ish minutes. And then you can come back and join us for the discussion, full spoilers, because we're going to dive into everything that happened this week in Skeleton Crew, the mid-season week, as we get through the 4th episode out of 8. We're going to take your guys' questions, give you our review and our thoughts immediately after watching this episode, and discuss all of the future plot points, kind of predicting the future, speculating what might happen here in the second half of the show and in episode 5 next week. So we're going to get into all of that. Before we do so, make sure you've liked the video if you haven't. It helps us out tremendously with the algorithm. And then subscribe to the channel if you are new. If you're watching this on replay, if you're just discovering us after we've already streamed, make sure you join us for the last 4 episodes of Skeleton Crew. We'll be going live to talk about all of them immediately after the episodes end, around 7 to 7:30-ish Pacific time. We do have a couple of complications these next 2 weeks. We have Christmas Eve next week and then New Year's Eve the week after. So we want to hear your guys' thoughts throughout the stream, and I'm going to post a poll at some point in this stream tonight as well. And if you're watching a replay, comment. Let us know if you guys have any interest in watching streams those nights. We probably will go live for at least a little bit to discuss and give you guys our reviews, but we might not make those as long of streams as they usually are because they are holiday nights. So let us know in the chat, and then eventually when I put up that poll, let us know in that poll if you are interested or are busy on Christmas Eve / New Year's Eve around 7 Pacific. And then we will discuss. I know for some of you that's already Christmas Day and New Year's Day. So yeah, probably a busy day. It's kind of a weird time to release episodes, but they seem like they're going through with it unless something changes by the time we get to next week. And hopefully we'll hear about that this weekend. So we're going to go again, for those people just joining us, we're going to go into these episodes spoiler filled. So if you haven't seen the episode, watch it, and then we're going to come back and discuss. But let's start off tonight's stream, as we always do, with our reactions and our reviews. I'm going to pass it over to you, Sanak. What did you think of Skeleton Crew episode 4 now that we've hit the halfway point in season 1?
Yeah, it definitely felt like the first episode that wasn't trying to be standalone. I think you could look at the premier 2 episodes and they could still work independent of each other. And then the third episode really built off of that. This one felt like, okay, this is the first half. I expect to see a mirror after this. So this was a little bit unexpected, especially since this was directed by the Daniels. I guess this was just around the same time or just right after they finished, directing Everything Everywhere All at Once. So maybe they were on a time crunch. Maybe they were just brought in because they wanted to focus more on these relationships and a little bit more the dynamism that they bring with these characters that have some eccentric flair and almost unbelievable things happening. But then it really comes down to the core of communicating what you're feeling, who you are, what you're trying to be. So I thought that's where this episode definitely shined for me. It does, though, feel a bit incomplete still because I was looking for the adults. I was like, okay, give us some tease. Let's give us some steps. And we sort of got that with Jod kind of playing a little bit more of an auxiliary role and actually finding us near these star maps and everything. So it looks like we're getting somewhere there, but the episode really just does end with Neil fainting, right? So it kind of does feel like that's just like a hard cut because it's going to pick up immediately at the same time, either with the adults or it's going to continue with the kids and then spawn us into the adult storyline because hey, we're halfway through the show, and the way it feels like it's structured, it feels like there's going to be the premiere 2 episodes, then like a transition episode to the middle 2 episodes, then after next week's second half of the middle episode, then we get a transition to that final 2 episodes. That's kind of how I'm looking at the structure of this. I do wonder if once the stakes become a little bit more serious, once a little bit more of what's happening here and all these other Attin planets kind of come about is that's when maybe the parents will show up. So again, I'm hoping. We've seen enough of the parents that makes me think that they're gonna have significant roles, especially since they do eventually come together with the kids. But I found it very curious that this episode really wanted to kind of be episodic, be on its own, and then it still isn't fully committed to even that idea. It's like, no, this is just the first half of something. So, I don't know if it was just me, but that is kind of where I was like, oh, that just kind of ended there. And don't get me wrong, I really really did like Neil's development. I do like seeing Fern. And I do like seeing KB have moments, especially Fern, a little bit more of the emotionality coming out of her. KB continues just to be very much like I don't know, like, what's a good comparison? Uh,
Lobot
um,
before.
Lobot, sure, but I almost wanna say Legolas, like, just strange, like,
Yeah.
tricks and, like, abilities that she has, and then, like, celebrations and stuff, like, she doesn't even really know how to, like, high five, she's once it happens, she's like, "Ah, alright, that was pretty cool," right? And then Wim looks like he's finally maturing a little bit more, understanding, like, yeah, he's having plenty of fun, but he's noticing, like, he can't just depend on everyone else around him to just do what's necessary, and he can't just expect Captain Fern to handle and all that, so that was pretty good. Very interesting to see a little bit more what's going on with SM33. I'm curious if Jod's had some stuff happen in the background leading up to him connecting with the kids, and maybe he's not necessarily, you know, working against them, not double agenting it per se, but maybe he's got some more context and clues that will maybe help him directly once they are closer to Attin. Like the kids and him seemingly have found out a little bit about, hey, this is just the situation that this was purposely erased by SM33 and the previous captain. Whether or not the captain's important doesn't matter. It's just not supposed to be something that happens here, and that's maybe why that ship got crashed on Attin in the first place, to keep it as a hidden secret. So it's very interesting. I feel like the mystery has reached a different height now, but I'm
Mhm.
not sure exactly where we're gonna go next because we still haven't gotten a clue about what's happening back home and at Attin. So I don't know if the kids are gonna stumble into this story that we get flashbacks into or not. So that's kind of where I'm at this episode. It was fun to see. It felt very much like the Jedi Apprentice little books when Obi-Wan kind of goes off and is helping in the Child War that Wim kind of basically references. But yeah, I wasn't very sure what was like next. What's going on and why did we just end there? So this is probably the most curious I felt after an episode. I enjoyed myself. There's good humor, good emotions, and all that. But the first time, I'm like, I don't know what's gonna really happen next.
Yeah, I think overall I was a little bit more positive, but enjoyed the ride for sure. Again, this week, still enjoying the mystery, still enjoying watching it unfold. At first, I never really bought that they were at Atten, but at first I, was thinking, okay, maybe we are going to actually speed up our timeline to getting back to Atten. I think I said in predictions, I can't remember if I said episode 6 or 7, but I still think we're on track for getting back around that timeline. As for this week, this was the French treasure planet of the Old Republic, apparently. It was a fun episode. I mentioned in predictions, this is where I think the show's going to get a little bit more Mandalorian, and I think that's what we got here. Is in the middle of the show. If you follow the structure of Mandalorian season 1 and Mandalorian season 2, you kind of have the stuff that really connects to the main plot go on through the first 3 episodes and then the last 2 episodes. And then episodes 4, 5, 6 are stepping stones to get to those plot points, whether it's done well, like in Mandalorian season 2 for the most part, or it's done poorly, like in Mandalorian season 1 at times, where you've got the Gina Carano episode, and then you've got the Tatooine episode, which is one of the worst episodes of Mandalorian, and then you've got the prison escape episode, and it's kind of like they're getting closer to their ultimate goal, but it's really sidetracked. Season 2, I thought was much better because they're directly interacting with the elements that are driving the plot. They need to find a Jedi for Grogu. They find Ahsoka. They interact with Boba Fett eventually, but they go and sit on the stone there that calls out to Luke. There are moments that continue to push the plot forward, and I felt like this was closer to that Mandalorian season 2 type of movement where, yes, this is kind of a side adventure, and the first 3 quarters of the episode don't necessarily have as much to do with the overall story, but you do get a bit more backstory on the different treasure planets, which we learned about at the end of last episode. Then you get to see what one that's completely opposite of Attin, Akron, looks like. And now it's war torn and people can't get off the planet. Although, interestingly enough, this one looks like people, they are used to outsiders. People can find
Mm.
Akron versus in at Attin, nobody can find it. And it's vague. I got to watch it again, but it seems pretty vague on whether the people of Akron know anything about Attin or they're just oblivious to every planet out there. They don't really care. They're just dealing with what they have to deal with. But then having creatures like Eope on here, we see, Ithorians and Rhodians on this planet. Both of them are kind of, the Ithorian especially, kind of a different color than we usually see with Ithorians. Usually Ithorians we see brown. This one was kind of like a greenish color. So that was kind of interesting. So I thought maybe, there's different species or hybrid of Ithorians that live in a different area of the galaxy, maybe separated since the Old Republic. But there were a lot of fun little Easter eggs throughout this episode, and I did enjoy it. Seeing Matthew Kassovitz, he's one of the most famous French actors we have. Kind of plays the French guy in every American movie, but he also is in like Lane and Amelie. So done some incredible French movies as well. So one of the more famous actors, and similar to Mandalorian, having them show up for like one little role just to be in Star Wars, kind of that embracing that spirit of the episodic nature of these shows. Would have loved to see him obviously get a higher profile role, but this was fun for what it is. I did think this episode was pretty predictable. Up until the very end, I liked the twist of SM-33 trying to kill them. I thought that was
Yeah.
fun, and I can't wait to see how they, solve that problem next, because I think that's going to be one of the big plot points for the next episode. Is not only how did they find Attin with the clues they now have, but how do they fix SM-33, who seemingly has all that knowledge but can't access it because he might kill them all? So do they have to find a droid smith next episode? Does that lead them to some other infamous droid smiths like the Anzellans or Babu Frick, or somebody else we haven't seen in this galaxy, this part of the galaxy, maybe working with some of the pirate nations and all of that stuff. So I found all of that really fun. More hints to, which is why I don't think we have seen the parent stuff yet, and why I don't think it was in this episode, was because I think we're all, because this is a lower level show, it's meant more for families, more for kids. I think we're all a little bit ahead of it already in terms of predicting where it's going. And I think here, what they're trying to do was really lay the foundation for like, oh, that's the same structure the supervisor is in Attin. Oh, this is the same thing the supervisor does in Attin. Oh, Neil's mom works at this building in Attin. When I get older, I'm going to do the same thing too. It's a lot of, they're laying the groundwork continually for that overall conspiracy that's going to happen. And when we get the ultimate reveal about the supervisor, how they're connected to this whole mystery, how they're connected to maybe the previous captain with SM-33, how old SM-33 is, how old the ship is, all of those different mysteries. Does Attin have a role in what happened to Akron, why it's ruins, or is that just something that happened by an invasion previously? I think a lot of those things will start to get answered and will creep towards that mystery next episode and in the following couple weeks. I think the next two will slowly creep us towards that mystery. But I do expect next week to be another kind of episodic adventure. I think it will have something to kind of do with trying to access SM-33's memories without him attacking them. And ultimately, I think this one gave us enough story beats while also having a pretty fun character building episode and an offbeat adventure that I enjoyed this one quite a bit. I still think last week's was my favorite episode so far, but this sits comfortably around this whole series where it's like it's good. It's really good at times. I'm still waiting for like that 9, 8, 9, 10 out of 10 episode for me, but I really enjoy this series for what it is, and I've ultimately really enjoyed this week. So let us know what your guys' thoughts are in the chat right now. We're going to get to your chats as soon as we can, going first come, first serve. So we're going to talk here for the next hour ish or so about this week's episode, your predictions, your speculation, your theories, your thoughts, your reactions, anything you would like to discuss about this week's episode of Skeleton Crew and into the future about Skeleton Crew. So if you want to talk about episode 5, you want to talk about episode 6, you want to talk about your great grand conspiracy for the entire season, let us know all that in the chat. As always, super chats are priority as well as member chats. So make sure you comment and send in a super chat if you would like to support the channel. It also gets you bumped up to the top. And then if you aren't joining us this week, make sure you join us live next week to talk about episode 5. All right, let's get into the chat here, starting with Anthony Tiff, who said, "Great episode. It was very interesting. I love the Star Trek grub reference that Wim gave." I'm not sure I know what that reference is. I'm not a huge Star Trek person, but appreciate that. Let us know. Can you
Yeah,
clarify what that is?
at least I know it's a little bit about like it's like the Enterprise goes to a planet that looks like exactly like Earth, but it's just inhabited by children. And then you
Mm.
find out like once they enter puberty, they die off from this strange disease. It's like it's very similar. It's like why the kids kind of stay away from the adults. Um, I don't know if I 100% saw Grubs because of that, because it is a little bit more straight division between childhood and adulthood and what that really means. But this is because you got to see a little bit more mingling, and obviously, like Liam was mentioning, that really famous French actor is the leader. So there's a mix of adults and children. They all seem to be on equal footing, and we respect our children. So similar. I'll give you that. I was thinking more of I'm trying to think of the which Jedi apprentice was it that had the child war that, like, Obi-Wan kinda leaves the order for temporarily?
Oh,
I don't know.
oh my God. Yeah, I forgot what her name is. Uh, Um,
Hmm, yeah, I'm trying to the Civil War on Melita Dawn, with the
mhm.
young. Yeah.
Anthony says the war on the planet of Atrakan reminds me of the open and closed war in Obi-Wan and Anakin comic, where they have no contact with the wider galaxy for 2,000 years. Yeah, that's another good point. Good
Yeah.
connection there. That comic series, the don't remember it that well, honestly. It was okay, but I remember that, like, the setting, and it does look very similar, very war torn, very decrepit, decaying, ancient technology. The tech we see here, it's complete opposite of the pristine version of the old Republic that we've seen on Attin, right? This is really, really decrepit. It's falling apart. Everything, not just the planet, but they don't have anything and they're trading for weapons, right? But these people are obviously taking advantage of them because these weapons are awful. So yeah, very similar, if not even worse in this episode.
Yeah. No, I guess the biggest thing I can remember about that comic, and it's not really much, is that it's Charles Soule's first real foray in Star Wars, so, maybe they wanted to harken back to something that canon's already kinda done. But this definitely felt like child soldiers caught up in a war. What does that mean? It's a very common trope. It's been explored a lot, but this was definitely played a little bit more comedically because you have like the adult figure being like, "What are you guys gonna do for us?" All this and that, and he's like, "Oh no, we respect you guys. We cheer you guys on." It felt like there's a lot more to actually uncover with this
Mhm.
planet. I don't know if it'll be tied to the grander narrative, but like Liam was saying in his part of the review, seems like they know about other planets and maybe even have outsiders. It doesn't seem shocking to them that a ship landed there, right? It's more just like, why did you land here, right? So
Right.
it'll be very interesting to see if there is more elements of this. It's maybe these jewels are all aligned together and there's some very interesting connection between all three that for some reason Atten has avoided. Maybe because of the good reasons or maybe bad reasons, right? There's a reason why it's called the treasure planet. Did it just plunder everything else? Did it have some way strange like center point station situation where the planets got out of alignment and everything went wrong. Like, who knows?
Yeah, those are all good points. And I think we're going to continue to learn about that because they name dropped almost every single one of the treasure planets in this episode. They all began with at. So it'll be interesting to learn with the naming convention. It'll be interesting to learn if each planet is a different real world culture. Like this one, everybody had French accents and everything was French sounding. So we'll see what the rest of them are. The first, the Attin seems very suburbia America. So who knows? Who knows what the rest of them will be? I would imagine we go to at least one more of these planets, maybe by the end of the episode or the end of the show, because I think they're going to need to figure out if there are other maps to this location in the other towers that are on all these other planets, right? So I would be surprised if we don't see one, at least one more of these places to see if they
Mhm.
can get access to the information that they need, and they know how to get to every other planet from the at treasure planets. So hopefully next episode we see them go to one of the other ones and we can kind of compare and contrast all three of them.
Yeah, definitely.
Anthony also says, I also like the mirror that looked like a selfie stick. Are you I'm blanking on that. Was there a mirror?
It
Or are you
was
talking about the shot that they had? The like shot that was kind of attached to the bodies of SM-33 and
okay.
that that was an interesting choice. That was an interesting style choice for sure. Um, I always appreciate when filmmakers try to put their stamp a little bit more on the style and look of a Star Wars show. But that one definitely popped out as like, did this need to be in here? I thought it looked great on SM-33. I didn't necessarily love the over the shoulder, like at first person perspective look
Mm,
to it. It looked a little fisheye-ish. It didn't they didn't look the kids didn't look great when you were seeing the first person part, but I liked when it was attached to like the shoulders of
yeah.
SM-33.
When you got that like really strong close up as his body's like
Yeah.
transforming and then it's stuck there. Yeah, but if you're talking about like the mirror that the girl uses to see over her shoulder, right? Like that
Mm,
feels like pulled straight out of
yeah.
Terminator. Feels like that's like a post-apocalyptic, you know, war-torn civilization trick, right? You use rear view mirrors, which now that I think about it, I don't think we've really seen many rear view mirrors in Star Wars. It's just sensors. So again, I mean, this is a planet that seems to be at least similarly, or at least almost exactly copied to what Attin is. So even if these are the French, they still have seemingly the Americanized suburbia that is at Attin, for at least most of the buildings of that. So maybe their cars that are on tracks have that, and I just haven't paid attention. It's just not a thing. Curiously, that Star Wars really cares for, but you have to have that mirror come from something. I mean, maybe it could be a pocket mirror with just a little selfie stick attached to it, but who knows?
Anthony also says, where did I lose you there? Do you think the planet that was home to the open closed is connected to Attin? I think so. I think we're going to find out more about what happened to Akron in these next couple episodes. I think especially if we go to another one of these planets, you're going to figure out if Attin's at the heart of all this. I know we talked about, I can't remember. We record these and our predictions very close to each other, so I can't remember which discussion was which. But we talked about last week. One of the things I threw out was like, what if we've only seen droids? What if there was some type of like droid hive mind kind of supreme intelligence type of thing, like we see in the Kree or in other comic stories? And Atton has just a droid controller. The supervisor is a droid. It's an ancient droid that is controlling the planet and has heartlessly, kind of used its subjects to promote itself, continue to evolve the analytics and the data and all the things these families are working on. They're all running what they're schooled for. All of it is just used to improve the artificial intelligence. And in doing so, it also went and wiped every other planet out, took all their treasure, brought them back to Attin. We'll see if that is the case, but I do think there's going to be something in the Attin conspiracy that also connected to why Akron is so destroyed, but Attin is completely fine.
Yeah, definitely a good point. Because like when we're going up to that supervisor tower, you're expecting something or like some maybe a hologram or somebody. You don't really just expect just star map and then that twist with SM33, which is why that is definitely a strong way to end the episode. It's just I found it a little abrupt that it just really just ended on Neil fainting. It's like
Mm,
okay, so I guess we start with him waking up or something. But yeah, it'll be interesting if maybe there were other, like, droids. I know we've just had that Dark Droids arc in the comics, the 2020 line, and
mhm,
even though there is, like, one supreme being, like, one droid consciousness, it eventually starts, like, building out different ones before it starts, you know, saying like, "Oh, I can't handle this part, like this decision making and
mhm,
that decision making, or I need companionship and all that." I wonder if this is almost like an inverted way of it, like where they were all working together, it was all fine, but maybe one of them starts getting corrupted by something on the planet of Attin or some other external force, and then things kind of go south. And someone left on our predictions for this episode, like, "Oh, is this something like Palpatine could have done?" I don't know. I mean, it'd be pretty interesting if he's managed to like stockpile everything and put it all on Attin. But I think it'd be pretty surprising if the kids didn't at least know the Clone Wars at that point, because you
yeah,
kind of need to be an emperor for that to happen. But could that be somebody else, some other civilization, maybe some dark side user, a pirate, some ancient like Zim the Despot or something in ancient
mhm,
times that created this, or someone opposing him, and then to try like balance out these planets that are maybe constantly warring over their stuff. Like we don't know. Like what does it still mean to be the old Republic jewels? That's still a big question, right? And we've only gotten clarity that like, yes, we know the names now of everything, but Attin was destroyed in the star maps, at least on this planet, by SM33 and the captain and his crew. And for all we know, maybe the captain is the bones on the ship, but I'm not sold anymore on that. I do wonder if
yeah,
you could say even SM33 was rolled into that like droid intelligence. Maybe he was for one planet just another member of the droid takers that we kind of see throughout at Atton. Maybe this was the droid on at Akron, right? Or whichever planet. Maybe there's one that's a little bit more militant and more focused. It could be this one, it could be something else. It'll be very interesting just to see how droids are being used here. Because we haven't really seen droids since maybe the original trilogy not only be so fallible where they can just be turned on and off, but also have some like very strange hidden complications. So I'm pretty curious. Like this feels like it's taking some of the ideas that were there for like the R2 situation, like why is he asleep? What's gonna like activate him? Right now we're kind of seeing this play out and with a very, kid friendly, but definitely a more mysterious underworld kind of story playing out here. So assuming SM33, it was just a part of a pirate crew was kinda how they wanted to portray it to us.
mm.
Now that he's very much someone that we have to, like, dig through his brain and uncover something, I don't know, man. It could just be something that's happened 30 years before this show that's really set the stage for everything and erased history and put people into this structure, or something entirely else, which is, I will admit, the most exciting thing that's come out of this.
Yeah, and I think in my head, the only way you could really connect Palpatine, or one of the main ways you could connect Palpatine, is if he came and tried to invade Atton and discovered the treasure, and kind of they made a deal basically, and was like,
Hmm.
you give us money and all your treasure and fund the empire, and we leave you alone. And that's the only way I can really see it. Maybe that type of thing brought or enacted this kind of hostility towards some of the other planets, or led to the ultimate kind of trail that led SM33 and its captain over to Atton. There are a lot of things like that could maybe line up, but I tend to not think Palpatine really has anything to do with it. If anything, I would love it to be if there is a Sith element or connection to the Sith, I would prefer it to just be an ancient Sith, whether it's one we've never heard about, one we have heard about, one of the more famous ones that we haven't heard in canon yet, or haven't really heard much about in canon yet, that's tied to the Old Republic or the end of the Old Republic, whatever it is. But I would prefer it to not be Palpatine. I think that keeps the
Yeah.
mystery up a little bit more about this unknown and how it remained hidden for so long. I think, as we've talked about before, like, if it was Empire, I just think that kind of negates the whole mystery, right? Like, it's just a lot less interesting, in my opinion. It can still be done well, but it's a lot less interesting if the twist is just, oh, yeah, the Empire's been controlling it,
Yeah.
and the droids or whoever is in charge are working for the Empire. That would be kind of bland to me. Like, everything always has to tie back to the Empire. Why can't this just be its own thing and tie directly into a side of Star Wars we haven't seen yet in canon, and a side of Star Wars that has so much rich lore and history? This could just be another facet to that story. So for me, I would prefer it to not have any Imperial ties, but if it did, I could see it be some type of like blackmail, basically. Like, Palpatine's like, I'm going to
Mhm.
destroy your planet if you don't give me all your treasure. And then I think he still would have destroyed the planet, but
Yeah.
maybe they have a natural resource or something on Attin that he wanted mined, and the droids are mining it, but they're using the people. I don't know. It would take a lot to really make it work as a Palpatine thing, because I don't really see a world in which he doesn't just come there and just take what he wants. Um, but they could figure it out. Anthony also says, sorry, Mint. Do you think, okay, so just clarifying. And then the next one was Jod stealing the credit shows he's probably just obsessed with getting treasure. However, there's character development. He was able to get the kids back. Yes, and he was able to get the kids back because he still needed them to find their home, because they're not at Atton yet. I think that's the main reason he goes and gets them back. But there is, I think, going to be that scoundrel with the heart of gold thing with Jod. I think he's going to continue to try to pull one over on him until he gets a better offer. But right now, his best offer is finding Atton. He saw the credits. He knows now for the first time really what treasures could lie there. And as with all pirates and all scoundrels, they want more. He doesn't just want a handful of credits. He wants to get the whole thing. So I
Yeah.
think
The
that's
whole
the main
shebang.
reason he goes back for the kids. But there is going to be something there. He's starting to like them a bit more than he initially did, or did at the beginning of this episode.
Yeah, and I agree. Like he is a character that isn't a Han. He can almost put on like what Han is like post embracing, like, hey man, I do have a heart of gold. I do want to do the right thing. That's what he's able to play at. And I mean, this is a character who we've literally seen wear different masks, right? He has the mask as the pirate in the first episode. He's got the voice and the charisma to play a Crimson Jack, even though we've seen in canon and legends, it's a bearded like a Scottish man basically in space. So he has played different personas. I do wonder now if this is really him, or at least the one that he's settled into and or been stripped down to, and now he's like, okay, yeah, let me see what I can figure out. Or is he playing this act, right? Because I did find it pretty curious that yes, he gets surrounded on the ship, and then him and SM-33 just for giving a couple of credits to
Yeah.
these planets that are just warring over resources, right? Like Aeopes, not anything, and it's not like they're eating some gourmet food either. It's like green sludge and a loaf of bread. What are these credits gonna do? And I thought I found that pretty suspicious. So I do think that yes, he is warming up to them. I do think he's getting a little bit of character development, but simultaneously, he's like, I got to keep some things, you know, like any good gambler, like tucked away in his sleeve, ready to pull out when necessary to kind of take advantage right now. Like this, his beginning scene is like saying, "Oh, like Furnace, like go back. You're not. I'm the captain. You can't be in the cockpit. No adults in the cockpit, right?" And he's kind of babysat and all this and that. So why wouldn't he try to get something one up on them when the moment strikes. At this
Sure.
moment, get them a little softened up, and then bam, like pull it on them. Will he eventually still do right by them and happens to align with what he wants? Yeah, I think that's kind of the way things are gonna go. But um, I don't know. I do like his characterization in this episode. He's a little bit more livelier. You get to see a little bit more of him like comfortable with the kids instead of just desperate. So I'm very curious if he's truly just genuinely happy being around the kids and a crew that's not going to backstab him, or if he's trying to build something to upend them being in charge in their specific mission.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't buy that either. I don't buy that he escaped just from a couple of credits,
Yeah.
especially because these people just trade in resources and they don't want. I mean, maybe we don't see the other, what was it? I wrote them down. The Hutton. We don't see their side. Like we don't know what they're about. We only know what the Troik are about.
Hmm.
So maybe they love credits, but the Troik seem like they could care less about credits. So
Yeah.
if both sides are similar, then I don't necessarily buy that he got out with credits. I was expecting SM33 to have taken them all out. That's what I thought they were going to say. Maybe he did something to his mind, but yeah, I think there's something else there. I think Jod's going to be a wild card. I mean, ultimately through the end of the show, I think he's going to
Yeah.
be somebody you can't trust. They've already set it up. I mean, he had that, he had kind of his Han Solo moment in this episode when they were like, "You sure you don't want any of our pelts?" And he's like, "Well, how many pelts are we talking?" And they're like, "Jod," and he's like, "I'm kidding," but I don't think he was
Isn't.
kidding. And yeah, we're gonna see that. I mean, if he gets a better offer, we've seen pretty much every scoundrel or pirate, good or bad, Hondo, Han Solo, Lando, all these characters, they take the best offer they can get. So I think the kids are gonna learn that the hard way at some point in this show. I don't expect Jod to just now all of a sudden be their buddy, whether it's on at Attin when he tries to steal everything and says, "See you later. You can deal with your problem at home with the supervisor. I'm just going to take my treasure and leave." Whether it's at that point or whether it's a little later when maybe they try to claim the treasure and he's like, "Nah, this is mine now. You guys are stuck here." And then he leaves them to get captured. It could be one of those types of things. Yeah, I think ultimately he'll end a hero, but he's going to turn on them at some point, whether it's in episode 6 or episode 7. I think he'll turn on them, only to have a little bit of redemption in episode 8. Let's see, where are we now? We have Anthony says the soldiers' helmets looked similar to Imperial helmets, but I don't think these guys know about the Empire. I completely agree. Maybe it's something they've traded for. That's the only thing I could think of, but they did look like ATST drivers' helmets, very
Yeah.
much so when they were fighting in the war or like getting ready to fight in the war. So I thought the exact same thing, but unless that design is a classic Star Wars military helmet design, my thought is they've traded for him, especially maybe in the wake of the Empire. The Empire's gone. Maybe people went to Endor and found all these helmets on the ground, scooped them up, and went and traded with different people and sold these helmets. Anything can happen in the Star Wars galaxy. But yeah, that was my thought when I saw them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, that maybe kind of builds into what we were saying. Like, yeah, this is definitely something that these characters, at least on this planet, are aware of outsiders because they trade with them or they were under the Empire. Like, there's no like definitive thing about them being 100% connected in the same region of space. They're just jewels. They just happen to have coordinates to each other. So when they were discussing it, like this is a system, that's another system. They're not close. They're close by maybe Star Wars standards, but we don't know. They could be on different sides of the galaxy or different sides of wild space or the unknown regions, wherever they are right now. So it'll be interesting. I am very curious what they're trying to do that with that one, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
I just put up a poll right now for everybody who wasn't here during the first 15 minutes or so of the stream. And we ask everybody who joins us regularly or is joining us for the first time to please respond to this poll if you could. This is really for our benefit and for your guys' benefit so we can give you the best shows possible. I mean, obviously, for us, we also have personal commitments on these days, but we're going to try to make it work on either of the days if it interests you guys. So let us know. As I said at the beginning of the episode, episode 5 next week is on Christmas Eve, at least here in on the West Coast and well in the United States. It'll be coming out a little bit later, probably Christmas morning or Christmas Day for some of you if you're watching in different parts of the world. And then same thing for episode 6. It's coming out on New Year's Eve here. Will be much later, like closer to midnight New Year's Eve. And that's 9 o'clock Eastern time if you're on the East Coast, and then probably New Year's Day for those of you who are in different parts of the world. So obviously, those are very important days to a lot of us with family and everything. So if you can't make it, let us know. If you can make it for one of the days, not the other. I know most of you probably don't know exactly what you're doing for New Year's Eve yet. But if nobody can make it, we'll probably just drop our reviews and not do a very long stream. But if a bunch of you can make it, we'll try to fit in at least an hour or so, maybe for those nights, because we want to keep this up and we enjoy the conversation and we want to give you guys the best show possible. So let us know at some point throughout tonight if you can make it in that poll. It'll be up through the rest of the stream. And if you are watching again on replay, let us know in the comments if you couldn't make it this week for the live, but you can make it for one of the next 2 weeks. All right, back to the questions here. We have Anthony who says, your film background is really impressive and one of the reasons that I love your guys' analysis. Well, thank you. We try to be as detailed as possible and use all the things we've learned to help break down and analyze a lot of these scenes and these trailers and these shows and the trajectory of the plots. So I appreciate that compliment.
Yeah, no, I mean, if we're not coming at it from a film perspective, we're coming at it from a Star Wars perspective, and that for us as fanatics is usually all encompassing, right? It's EU, which is like why like your further comments about like the uncertain path from Jedi Apprentice are then bringing in the comics, the Obi-Wan and Kenobi comics, and then maybe other franchises like Legolas and how I compared Legolas to kind of how KB's been characterized, but like very strange abilities, almost elf-like, but the equivalent with sci-fi and you know Lobot-esque personalities and technology, right? So yeah, we like to find and compare contrast. Some of this stuff is really just foundational once you kind of get into reading about stories, the hero's journey and all that stuff, right? But it's always nice to see what you can piece together, what you think it's being inspired by. We don't know 100% for sure, obviously, but it's nice to be able to continue watching all these different movies and shows and see like, oh, what is Star Wars pulling from? Because Star Wars has always been a place where you throw all these different genres, ideas, characters, kind of blend it together, add something else to it, and it comes out and it's entirely new and full of fresh possibilities. And in some ways, that has become almost like a detriment to Star Wars because people are like, it's too Star Wars. It's become just repeating on its own nostalgia, on the safe mechanisms of its universe. But that's why something like this really works for us because it is trying to do something different. It is still obviously making some great connections to stuff that we know about Star Wars through imagery, through aliens and all that, but it's pulling from more films, more stories, and that's what's exciting us, especially now that we're entering this back half. This could be like a very, very unique story, and especially for a Disney Plus show structure for the rest of the season.
Absolutely. Battlesize says, hey guys, I recently watched Caravan of Courage and Ewok Adventure and Battle for Endor. Both stories written by George Lucas. Disney shows are great, especially Skeleton Crew and its tone. Very aligned in spirit with them. I mean, yeah, you're completely right, especially with Caravan of Courage. Very much so a similar story where the kids are trying to find their parents so they can get home. And it's this strange world. I think that's certainly an inspiration. I mean, if you reference the holiday special as much as this show has referenced it, we got 2 appearances of the circus now. Now, I, I'm sure that's another thing that was on the mind that were on the minds of John Watts and Chris Ford when they wrote the show. Um, this is certainly I would agree with you completely that this embraces the spirit of them. I absolutely think this is much better.
Yeah, yeah,
Because the acting is so much better.
yeah. I mean, we can kind of make fun or diminish a lot of what Lucas was doing outside of the trilogy at the time, the original trilogy, but it was pretty foundational to, like, a lot of stuff that is now almost standardized, right? Like, we have child actors able to lead shows, like, sure, there are adults there, but they are the stars, they have some heavy lifting to do, right? But then it's, again, harkening back to what kinda came in the years after George Lucas as we got more and more into the '80s and we saw Spielberg and a lot of these other creatives like Richard Donner and all that do Goonies and do all these different shows. So it's really cool seeing Star Wars being like, okay, we might have like done some interesting attempts at very, very low budgets that were very, very just straight kid, not just kid friendly, just for kids and maybe kids alone. But was that necessarily a bad thing? No. I mean, I'm rewatching Droids right now. I took a long break, but I'm kind of on that final kind of stream right now of episodes, and it's so nice to see like some of the insane creativity that comes with just using some basic ideas from the Star Wars universe and then playing with these side characters as 3PO and R2 and seeing who they run into and in some situations why they would almost be equals to them, right? You don't really see them equals to the characters in the original trilogy. It's Luke, it's Han, it's Leia. They
Mhm.
can't be, and they weren't written like that. But when you see a Wicket, when he starts speaking, that might throw you off. But then you see his place in his society, in his Bright Tree clan, and you get to see the Gorax. You get to see how he like fits into the world. You get to see how a comparatively same size being like the children are able to do these things, right? And like Star Wars has crazy things and leaps and bounds, and some of them is just the fact that kids are uber talented. So yes, they can do all these things. They can put together ships, they can crack safes and all this and that, but they're also kids. And I think that's what's really underrated about a lot of these TV specials and movies that Lucas did is that, yeah, sure, there's for merchandise probably, but you get to see some interesting things about like how he lets other creatives think about how kids in the Star Wars universe would function or how they look at certain characters and they kind of like hyper focus on them, on they hyper focus on the droids and see like, hey, what would they do in this situation where they're a little bit more elevated and all that. And this is just kind of following that blueprint, but with a lot more focus on canon, a lot more focus on structure, connections to the greater Star Wars lore. And yet this show is very much saying like, yeah, but we're not forgetting any of that. The holiday special, like Liam said, we see that circus act twice now. We're definitely gonna see something else, maybe from the Ewoks, maybe from droids. Something is gonna be referenced by the end of the show because John Watts and his crew, they have a love for all that stuff, and they wanna remind us that, yes, we can say Thrawn trilogy and all that saved Star Wars for the average person, but this was some of the first things that were coming out after episode 6 came out that kinda kept people going for, like, at least another year or 2 before, they kinda let it sit for a while and in a totally different decade and a totally different time period where you couldn't just stream shows and just make the huge CGI special effects blockbusters like you
Mhm.
on a whim like you can now.
Absolutely. And we're definitely spoiled nowadays with how much content we get. And I had somebody comment on the video the other day of the holiday special, all the lowlights. And they're like, if when we were there in 78, we just wanted more Star Wars. This was awesome when it came out.
Yeah.
And then other people were like, no, I was there in 78 and it also wasn't awesome. But uh in that same vein, just like there are a lot of memeable things and goofy things about the prequels that we love because we grew up with those movies. It's the same for those people who grew up in the 80s and late 70s and loved the Ewoks movies and the droids and Ewoks cartoons. So, yeah, definitely Star Wars. We've been saying this for years, but almost everything is somebody's gateway into Star Wars, and those all have valid places, even if they're not necessarily our favorite things. So, thank you so much for that comment. And then Anthony just sent in a super chat. Thank you so much, Anthony. We really appreciate your support and for joining us and commenting along every single week. Anthony said, your film backgrounds, in my opinion, gives you a unique perspective as you guys have more nuanced and measured takes, unlike the fandom menace. Well, that's what we try. I mean, we try to just, even if we hate something, give you why and discuss the reasons, the background, the techniques, the storytelling behind it. And, that generally, because we're Star Wars super fans and because we can find nuanced ways to like almost everything, that generally leads to us being more positive. The negative, I think the Acolyte is certainly the only thing that I've been extremely negative about. Even Boba Fett, there were things to enjoy. Um, and it sucks. I don't like being negative, but try our best to be nuanced. And I've enjoyed the show. I'm going to always give you my honest take. So thank you so much for recognizing that about our channel.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it, Anthony. And yeah, like, look, Liam didn't like it. We've talked about that. Like, we've talked about it off camera. We talked about it on stream. We've kind of diverged a bit. I've definitely gone a little bit more negative as time has gone on with the Acolyte because less so the story itself. It was more the execution. Like, I looked at some promo shots today that came out from Andor. We do know that the budget for this show and as Acolyte and the budget for Andor, they're both really up there. They're like two of the most expensive productions. And yet you see like the Coruscant interiors, Senate versus Jedi Temple or not, different era, as a High Republic versus Imperial era or not. It's like, okay, like was that choice made? Like, why does that not sit right with us? Yeah, some of it does come because we're used to the imagery of Star Wars, what we expect to see from Star Wars. And when different eras get introduced, sometimes that stuff becomes foundational. And then, yes, we don't want things to be too far from that, or it should at least always be evolving from that, right? But that is where we kind of bring in a little bit of the film stuff, right? We're like, okay, why would the production make a choice like that? Was it because they're using the volume? Were they using practical sets? Oh, practical. Okay, then why did they go for super dark and moody? Is that meant to evoke a little bit more about the character that's in the setting? Is that supposed to be more hinting at like, oh, a little bit more of their grayer personality, the choices they're making? I can't honestly say that I found a lot of the cinematography in Acolyte as the show went on great. The choreography was awesome. I mean, the lightsaber fight to this day, it's top tier. It absolutely is top tier. And I did like how lived in some of the exterior stuff was, but can I say that same about the rest of the episodes when you're in the hallways? You see big CGI out exteriors of ships landing at the temple, but then you go inside, you're like, okay, there's some characters. Sure, there's more than maybe a Mandalorian did, but why does it feel cramped? Is this a Jedi temple that's constantly renovated from the inside and it's shrunken and cramped? And we've seen it in Obi-Wan Kenobi, when we see it in others, that it's at least got rooms that have like a little bit more openness and all that. So like that's something that just from today, that's how I was thinking about the show, right? I was just looking at, okay, well, we know how much money they're spending, or at least estimates of it, and why is it so different? Is that production team that Leslie put together a lot more focused on writing, and she didn't necessarily have as much impact or emphasis on the production like she would have on a smaller show that she's showrun before, like a Russian doll? Yeah, and once you start asking those questions, it does become a little harder to just be downright negative, right? I think when you're only looking at Star Wars through Star Wars, yeah, it becomes hard to like Star Wars because it depends on what Star Wars you like. Depends on what you, if you're a reader, if you're an EU only fan, if you're a 2003 Clone Wars fan and you hate '08 Clone Wars. And yes, that is a real thing. Like there are so many subgroups in Star Wars that it's gonna always color your lens at looking at Star Wars. We're prequel kids. We know that colors our lens. And you know, I enjoyed Attack of the Clones a great deal watching it at the May 4th marathon. I watched it again 2 weekends ago, and I was like, "Wow, I was really struggling a lot more." The Obi-Wan Kenobi storyline that I really am always giving praise to, it's kind of falling flat for me, right? But that is why other films, other storytelling methods, looking at the production, looking at all the details, and then kind of seeing why was this a choice of creation? Why was this the creative spark that this team all wanted to put on there? That makes it a little bit more easier for us to be nuanced because we're looking at it at more than just, hey, this is not the stars that I remember. This is not the cool thing that I expected. This is not this because this and this happened in another Star Wars show or movie that I really loved, right? So yeah, you know, I think both of us are gonna find stuff that we love and hate. We'll probably have diverging opinions as time goes on too, even though we really haven't diverged that much over the years. But yeah, that is the beauty of it because it's what are we pulling from? What are we watching? What are we experiencing? What are we thinking about? And how does that relate to Star Wars and how we look at Star Wars? So yeah, we appreciate that you guys are seeing the nuance because that was kind of the whole point of this channel. And when we started talking, just as COVID was hitting, like, what can we add to the fandom of all these other podcasters and YouTubers that could be a little different?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it seems like, we try to just state it how it is. We try not to give you any BS. It's just to the point what we think. And obviously, like, what we think might not be what you think. And that's completely fine. Everybody has their own opinion, and everybody has their own direction and reasons for why they like Star Wars. So, yeah, thank you so much. And Anthony sends in another super chat. Thank you so much, Anthony. We really appreciate the support. Anthony says, I'm a prequel sequel kid that makes a lot of the fandom menace people mad, but I'm proud of it and gladly. Hey, I'm really glad you are. And
Yeah.
you can enjoy whatever you want, and nobody can tell you what to enjoy or what not to. All we can do is give you our thoughts on it, and we can have fun conversations in the chat. And even if we disagree with you on something you suggest, doesn't mean you're wrong. Just means that we think differently. That's fine. That's what we wanted here on this channel. We like going back to kind of that point Seneca made when we were talking about first starting our podcast, then YouTube channel. Um, One of the things we did think we could bring not just the nuance, but like the fact that there are two of us. There's not too many Star Wars channels where
Yeah.
there's discussion. More and more channels have started live streams that have kind of crossed with different YouTubers and stuff like that, but there's not too many channels that are run by multiple people that are in every video almost and have
Mhm.
varying perspectives. And so we kind of wanted to bring that to our community as well, and that's why we give you guys chances every week to give us your thoughts and your voice so we can hear what you guys are saying and give you our perspectives directly. And we hope that really connects and you guys enjoy the content even more. But thanks so much for your support, Anthony, and for always joining us every week for these streams.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a pretty interesting point, Anthony. You call yourself a prequel sequel kid, right? I think us at least we're a little bit closer to that tail end of the prequel kids, but that's still very firmly in the prequels. Once Clone Wars first had its break with season 5 being taken off the air, we'd kind of reached early high school. We'd kind of transitioned away. And yeah, we were excited for the sequels and all that. That was new, but the prequels for us was done, right? But there was
Mhm.
kids maybe like you who were 3, 4 years younger than us who Clone Wars was maybe their entryway into the prequels. Maybe that is what got you into it. And then you were at the ripe age of like, I want that next trilogy for myself, right? This is what's gonna hit. I mean, you might find a friend in a lot of the kids who were like 4 or 5 years older than us, who were the original trilogy kids who or were actually the earliest prequel kids because they saw those original trilogy films as the sequel trilogy, not sorry, not the special editions, right, when they came to
Mhm.
theaters and came to VHS and they first had the changes that George Lucas was making. And maybe that's what you love the most. You love seeing CGI Jabba the Hutt with uh, not as great as it was compared to 2011 or even 2004, but seeing that and then that extra scene and Han stepping on the tail, and maybe you liked seeing a little bit more of, like, alien species on Tatooine and all that. Maybe that just seemed normal to you, but for someone in 77, 78 who grew up with that, no, they weren't ready for that, and then they definitely weren't ready for the prequel. So, sometimes it is kinda nice being, like, a purely intergeneration between the next big Star Wars eras, and in most cases trilogy, because you get to appreciate an era that is at least rounding off and closing off, but usually in good form, and then entering into a new era where you're just ready for that freshness and to really make a stamp that connects with you from day one. So yeah, I mean, if you're struggling to find kids and friends like that are both prequels and sequels, you might find some like 30 something year olds, early 40s who understand a lot what you're feeling and definitely went on forums and stuff like that in the late 90s, early 2000s, just looking for someone to be like, hey, I like the original trilogy stuff and the VHS special edition, whatever you want to call it. I liked all of that. And I like episode 1 and 2, and then eventually 3.
Yeah, exactly. And and I can relate to a little bit of the sequel, you know, nostalgia and sequel fandom too, because I mean we were seniors in high school when Force Awakens came out. So
Yeah.
that was still kind of, a nostalgic time, especially going, on 10 years next year when
Yeah.
that movie came out. I mean, I think tonight is exactly 9 years ago since I saw Force Awakens for the first time. And, it's still one of my favorite memories I've had as a Star Wars fan. It was awesome. So, yeah, you're not alone in enjoying a lot of that. But appreciate that. Appreciate your comments and appreciate your support tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. But to scroll back up to the chat here where we last left off, we had Batasai, the manslayer, who said, from the perspective of a 12-year-old, every Disney Plus show I think is fire. A lot to enjoy in any of them. Nice tales, high production value, far greater than Caravan or Battle. Let's be grateful, I think. Hey, and that is a fair perspective. I It's a perspective I've had the majority of our time as Star Wars fans. Is we can be grateful that we have all this stuff because back in the 80s and especially in the 90s, they had nothing, no shows, no movies, no TV. So and even in the 2000s, we only had one show at a time, or we had, 3 years between Revenge of the Sith and the start of the Clone Wars, and then another few years between when the Clone Wars ended and getting the Force Awakens and all that type of stuff. So, we've gone through the ebbs and flows as a fandom, but I do think at this point, there is a little bit more weight to also the idea of, okay, if you're going to make this stuff and you're going to need us to watch it to be successful, we are kind of past the point where we should only be grateful to have Star Wars stuff because we're getting so much of it every year. And not to sound ungrateful for it, right? But we're the driving force as a fandom. Us watching gives them money, and we're the people that they want, right? So I think in a lot of ways, in that same fashion, we shouldn't just shut up and watch it. And I know that's not what you're saying, but we have to tell them what we want, right? If we're the ones that they're making money off of, we have to express the ideas that we want to see or don't want to see. We have to express the ideas that we like or don't like. We have to express the direction and the style that we want to see more of. And, we can't really do that without watching the show. Some people try to, but we can't do that without watching the show. So, these companies can't just look at, hey, you watched it, you must have liked it. No, you have to, if we watch it, we're trying to give your product a chance. You have to accept and understand and appreciate our thoughts on it after we watch it, right? And so I think that's kind of the push and pull that a lot of these studios are starting to learn with the fandom, right? With movies, you can take it as, well, somebody went and spent money on it. They went and watched it in the theater 5 times. They must have liked it. That's a little bit closer to actuality than just somebody subscribed to Disney Plus. They decide to watch one episode one time. That doesn't mean they like it. So I think listening to criticism is more important than ever. A lot of these studios just don't want to listen to criticism. A lot of these creatives nowadays don't want to listen to anybody saying there's something wrong with them or their product, right? And I think that's a huge mistake. As a creative myself, I think it's a huge mistake. I take every criticism I get on anything from a script to a YouTube video to a short film as an important part of getting better. And there's not too many people who want to get better nowadays. They don't want to hear it. And I think that's a problem we have for sure in the connection between the fandom and the creatives. Hopefully that starts to bridge because we try to give this place, here on this channel where you can listen to it, and it's, you might disagree with it, and that's fine. You cannot like what I have to say about your show, but I'm just an opinion of a lifelong Star Wars fan who likes certain things and doesn't like certain things. And I think that's also fair to explain. I know I went on a rant there about a site, and you didn't really mean for that. And we should be grateful that we have a lot of Star Wars content because we didn't for a long time. We basically got one thing at a time or nothing. But there is, I think, we've grown beyond with so much content. We've grown beyond just the point of here's your Star Wars, enjoy it, to the point where now we got to give our feedback and let everybody know this is what we want from Star Wars for the next 10, 15, 20 years, not just what we need now.
Yeah, and I mean, Star Wars is no longer George Lucas's baby, right? He sold it off, and it's not the same as someone who depended on just the merchandise to fuel his media franchise to continue making the stories that eventually people turn on him for, right? You can rewrite it all you want, but as prequel kids, we saw it happen. We saw, the Revenge of the Fanboys, the People versus George Lucas. A lot of the edgier material of early red letter media was about and centered around the prequels and kind of created a lot of like these YouTube discourse channels that have, frankly, just be propagated and become a little bit more weaponized, right? We live in an age where, yes, we can watch Star Wars at the tip of our fingers by clicking it on our phone, right? 20 years ago, I don't think any of us really thought about that. It was like a possibility, but to have this much variety, this many different mediums, just, we have VR games and all that. Like, yeah, no, it's crazy to think about where we're at right now. And, I'll be grateful that that's what Disney allows this franchise to do now. It has so much money they can pump in, but we also live in an age where everything's a little bit more reactionary, a little bit more quicker. A lot of that comes down to social media. That's why when Anthony mentions the fandom menace, yeah, someone will be like, yeah, 100% agree. Another person will be like, no, I don't, right? We become so very polarized about it that we're kind of forgetting about the filmmaking. We're kind of forgetting about why are these stories being made? Who is going to take the mantle up from George Lucas? Is the execution as great as we want, right? So that is what we focus on in this channel. We look at stuff, we look at the historical perspective, right? Like you're bringing up, you know, concepts of like the Gorax kind of being brought up in today versus back then and all that. Yeah, people's expectations change. When the Gorax first showed up on that TV screen, 22 inches on ABC with not the brightest color, you're probably like, yeah, it was pretty good. You watch that now on streaming when it's all cleaned up, when it has no issues with its quality other than what was, eventually converted from that film, or if it even was, because it might have just been shot on VHS or something, you're like, "Oh, that's not that great," but that's not what you remember. Like, all these little things are so reactionary, so quick, so nostalgic driven, and this is one of the longest visual fandoms ever, right? People are gonna have such expectations and beliefs, even if they are seeing a film in '77 versus 2019, someone will be like, "Oh, that new one was worse visually," and I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that, right? But that's kind of what this franchise is. It's a behemoth of so many different opinions in an age where things are just becoming more reactionary so quick, and people are, like you said, kind of closing off from each other. And a lot of channels on YouTube, frankly, even Star Wars channels, they'll look at that first episode. They're like, I love everything about it. I love Neil. Neil Nation exploded the moment he showed up on the trailer. And I think that's with good intentions, but it also just shows how quickly things are. Someone sees the Neil Nation hashtag go off. They're like, I want to dismiss Skeleton Crew as like, they're trying to get away from Star Wars. They're trying to be weird. This isn't the real Star Wars. Oh, they're rewriting stuff. Like, that's just the nature of it these days. So, yeah, grateful for what happened to lead us to this point, and that this franchise, for the most part, is doing all right. But now that we're at this point that we are doing all right very consistently instead of waiting and waiting until something cool happens, and it could be bad, it could be good. Now we're like, all right, let's get consistency and quality, raise the game. If this is Disney Plus really trying to take Star Wars back to the levels where Marvel has dominated of like the 2010s, you got to raise the stake for shows. You can't just say Andor is a one-off, right? That's kind of what they hoped Acolyte was going to be. It wasn't executed to that level that it needed to be, right? Skeleton Crew's targeting something else. Are they going to get the kids who watch Bluey, who watch a lot of cartoons and all that? Who knows? Maybe it works that way. Maybe this is their live action entry to Star Wars. That's going to be awesome to see, and that's what I'm grateful about. But I'm not gonna say that I want that to just be the baseline, that everyone's getting a little bit of smidgen of this and that. Star Wars, when it's at its best, is when everyone's really having a great time. And even if 80 to 90% of people agree and 10% don't, that's still a little bit better than we're standing since the sequels and since at least Mando season 2, where things have been a lot more up and down, COVID or otherwise, with the quality of the shows.
Yeah, definitely. And when you have expectations, you can't meet all of them. You can't listen to every voice out there, but you can, I think, get a good grip in today's world, especially what the majority of people are voting. And it's not just with their wallets, but also with their consuming habits and obviously merchandising purchases. I mean, I would assume that merchandising is part of the reason they canceled the Acolyte. I would imagine if it didn't sell well in the merchandising standpoint, they probably are like, okay, people don't like the show beyond maybe even just watched it. They're not interacting and engaging with it beyond, right? I think they take all those things into account. So using that criticism, I think, especially listening to accredited critics, listening to people who have platforms, listening to people who, like us, use our platforms to highlight your guys' voices as well. I think there's merit in that, a lot of merit in that. And I would like to see, and I think they are, I think they're starting to take those considerations now a bit more than they did in like 2019 through 22. I think
Yeah,
they're starting to do it. Now you could say maybe it's because it's financially motivated, right? It hasn't been the best 2023 for a lot of these companies, 2022s for these companies. They're trying to figure out what's next for their direction. And sure, that's the reason. But if that's what it takes to get people to listen to the voice of the masses, to figure out what people want to see and not just cater to it, but try to not do what they don't like. Like I think that's
yeah,
the big thing.
that's
Try
a huge
not to
thing.
make something just to make it. Try to make something that you hope that majority of people will enjoy. And I think people show up for that. It might not, especially on streaming, you might not see it right away, but I think people are going to carry this show, a show like Skeleton Crew that has been really fun and entertaining through 4 weeks. I
Yeah,
think this will be something that carries its way into the years to come, to where the creatives and hopefully Lucasfilm and Disney alike are like, wow, that was, something that we want to take inspiration from in the
yeah.
future. And hopefully that's the case going forward here. We do have another super chat from Toydarian Dan. Thank you so much for supporting the channel and for your super chat. Toydarian Dan says, have you guys considered picking 5 predictions at the end of your weekly prediction show and then tracking and discussing how you did each week on your live reaction and review? That's a great idea. I never thought about that
Yeah,
actually. We kind of do it in vague ways, right? Like
yeah,
we kind of both remember what we said, and then like it does blur, the lines do blur between this show where we also give kind of predictions and then the actual prediction show where we solidify our ideas a bit more and we go full into our actual predictions. But yeah, it would be fun to keep kind of like a vague scoreboard, or kind of yeah, just highlight some of the things we got right. So yeah, that's a great idea, and definitely consider adding that to tonight's, or these nightly recap and reaction shows.
yeah. And I mean, that's kind of the fun thing about predictions, right? It's kind of taking what we know as Star Wars fans, taking what we know as filmmakers with filmmaking backgrounds, taking what we kind of just want to see happen, right? Expectations, biases, and the creative part of it is kind of creating a narrative out of it, right? That's the fun part. So like for today, right? I was very confident we're gonna go and when we're recording the prediction, I hadn't even thought about it, but as I started talking, I was like, what if we go to another at Attin-like planet, one of the other jewels? We saw that map, started connecting the dots, bam, and that's exactly what happened. And yet, 2 weeks in a row, I've been completely off about the parents. I'm like, oh, so we're not really doing that Stranger Things thing that they've been kind of talking about in the media and all the marketing leading up to before we even saw the first visuals, right? With the parents. I'm like, is that still gonna happen? Is that pushed off? Or is it just that I've completely misread what the show is really about, right? That's really interesting to see what we expect, even though we're trying to be completely open-minded, especially for a show like this that isn't really targeted to the average Mandalorian Mandoverse fan. It's like, oh yeah, what did we get right? What did we get wrong? And it's fun. So yeah, I mean, we can definitely start doing that, making it a little bit more concrete. Um, I think if we start doing leaderboard stuff, I would probably start losing because 2 weeks in a row I've completely bombed on the parents. But third time's a charm.
Yeah, something to just kind of keep a tally on, like revisiting. Maybe what we do is we revisit the predictions video, kind of write them down, bullet point them before
Hmm,
the
yeah,
episodes come out, and
yeah,
then kind of cross off which ones actually happen, and then we can kind of see. So yeah, definitely we'll try to add that element maybe next week. Thanks for your suggestion. Then we have Batasai back a little higher up the stream. And oh yeah, before we get to your comment again, Batasai, sorry. Just wanted to remind everybody who is in the chat currently, we do have less people who have voted in the poll than who are currently watching the stream. So make sure you vote in that poll. It's really important for the trajectory of our show. I mean, it seems like right now the majority of people can make it for the episodes, which is good because that's, all we really wanted to hear. We will cover these episodes in some fashion. whether it's, for 30 minutes or an hour and a half, we'll cover them. We
Yeah.
just wanted to see if you guys will also be along for the ride so we kind of know how to plan out covering these episodes because it is at a very inconvenient time for most of us who are enjoying the community discussion, the community part of watching Star Wars shows. So let us know. Again, make sure you vote if you haven't. And then also like the video because there are a lot more of you who are watching right now than I've liked. All right, back to your chats here. And we have reached about an hour and 15 minutes. We usually go about an hour and 30 for tonight's show. So if you want to make sure you get a chat on, you can follow suit like Anthony and Toydarian Dance and in some super chats, and we will make sure we get to them. If not, we're going to keep working our way down the chat and try to get to everybody here by about an hour and a half. Badasai says, by the way, I hope we get to see live action Gorax with modern tech. I love the Ewok lore in these old movies, specifically that Gorax is rat hound, and the idea that the Ewoks are ants on the moon. Yeah, we have seen the Gorax return a bit more recently. The Gorax did appear in some comics recently. I believe the Ewoks comics it was in, and then the Return of the Jedi special ones that came out last year, or was it last year? Yeah, last year was the 30th or the 40th.
Yeah.
So we have seen them bring it back, and there's been a bit more love towards that early 80s era of Star Wars recently. I think with the 30th anniversary of Return of the Jedi, this year would be the 40th anniversary, and then this year would be the 40th technically of Caravan of Courage and the start of the Droid show and Ewok show. So there's been a lot of nostalgia wave, I think, for that time period for sure recently. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see it somewhere. My guess would be, Mando and Grogu, maybe. I don't know if necessarily they're going to go unless the Gorax is on multiple planets. I don't know if you're going to see one here unless in the Skeleton Crew, unless there's like some type of smuggler who is transporting Goraxes to different people. But we already know there's an underworld element. Maybe there's some type of crime boss who's a collector of different creatures and species and wants a Gorax instead of a Rancor or something. And maybe Rhoda the Hutt wants a Gorax and the Mandalorian Grogu movie. I don't know. That could be an interesting place to see it. We already saw Blurg's return in the Mandalorian season 1. So
Yeah.
maybe that's where we see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's Star Wars. There's some crazy alien or human that's transporting illegal aliens. And, like here on Earth, in reality, it's a very bad thing to introduce different species to environments that they're not originally from. It's invasive, it usually destroys and changes whole things. But in a galaxy of millions of planets, of trillions of beings, yeah, I mean, things are gonna go crazy. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like that. And usually, Star Wars tones down the reality of doing stuff like that. But it'd be pretty fun if we could see just how wrong it goes, right? I think that's something I'd love to see. Like, oh my god, like in Skeleton Crew, if Neil is like bringing the little rat creature that's in SM-33's eye to the planet, right? Who was noticeably a bit quiet this episode. You're like a little less active in the first three. Um, and it comes to this environment, and suddenly is like the kingmaker destroys all these other creatures that might be huge and big, but are susceptible to some disease or just terrified of small creatures. Or something. It'll be very interesting if they can play that kind of comedic, but also like, hey, let's play with the reality of like Star Wars constantly brings in different species that are not necessarily like offshoots or adapted to the environment, but just straight up like shouldn't be there and what that's gonna do. And I think this is a show that can balance that with the kids, with Jod, and still do like pretty fun things and pretty serious things with it. So that'd be something really cool to see. Yeah, I don't think the Gorax has come back in like the Ewoks miniseries that's coming here. I think there was like hints of one and they talk about it, but yeah, I that's one thing I do love about the Ewoks TV show. It just made Endor a little less than just the Sierra National Park. It's like, okay, well, this is a whole planet. These are incredible small bears, but these like little kid bears that we have here managed to survive in this crazy, crazy place that isn't too far from what Kashyyyk was probably imagined back in 1980 when it was the original plan for Return of the Jedi, but
Mhm.
is funnier and sillier and still has its own adventures and dangers.
Betasai says, I'm starting to read the EU in chronological order, currently on chapter 3 of A New Dawn. I think you mean, I read the rest of your comments, but I think you mean Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void. Because A New Dawn is the book with Kanan and Hera. That's the first book in Star Wars canon. But getting back to the comment, also says, so far I'm interested in the stuff with the brother, but honestly, despite this is a set 1,000 years, thousands of years far back in the past, it's kind of disappointing that there's no big change in the formula. I mean, there is the Jedi. They have some sort of order. The characters are written with the same concerns that you could find in any other character in any other point in the timeline. Nothing grandiose as the beginning of the Star Wars myth, though you're just another mystery. There's no answers. A real foundational myth. I hope Lucas is assisting the movie so they can present concepts that can be a bit more interesting, not just the same things with minor variation. You could say this is a problem for all the Star Wars timeline. Happily, the High Republic has introduced some new changes and new stuff to the formula. That's a big comment, but and a lot to dissect there. But yes, I would agree with you about Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void. I found that book really boring, and it's just a flat book. I felt like it doesn't dive into the world enough, and its characters are very static. It's very traditional. I completely agree with you. So I'm very on board with you there. I would say if you want to enhance your enjoyment of Dawn of the Jedi, and yes, this points you to another medium, but it's a comic based medium. The comics is really where the entirety of the world building is done. The novel really just piggybacks on the comics, kind of like Knight Errant with John Jackson Miller. At the
Yeah.
same, it was a similar time. Both stories were written. Knight Errant was a little bit before, and then Dawn of the Jedi was after. But the novel is certainly secondary. It just doesn't feel as important. Its character is not really a part of the comics. The comics is where you get that zero issue. It gives you a lot more of the backstory, the formation of the Jedi, all of that different stuff, and a bunch of different perspectives. You have a Sith character before the split between Jedi and Sith, so it's a lot more interesting. Unfortunately, it wasn't really ever completed. It does have 3 complete story arcs, but it just kind of abruptly ends because Disney bought Star Wars, and then that comic was coming out in 2013 and 2014. And they canceled it as they moved Dark Horse or Star Wars from Dark Horse back to Marvel and then restarted canon. So you never really get much out of the Dawn of the Jedi era, unfortunately. But I would agree the book is certainly the weakest part of the 2 parts. Highly recommend the comics, though, if you're interested in getting into something that does feel pretty different from standard. I mean, I guess the morality and stuff is similar, but it is different in terms of world building and tech and all that type of stuff. Very, very different from what you see in the Old Republic through the prequels and the original trilogy. So I definitely recommend checking out those comics if you want to redeem that era a bit more. But yeah, I certainly think it's better than the book.
Yeah, yeah, definitely agree with all that. I mean, it kind of comes down to the weird thing where they went so far back in Star Wars, past Tales of the Jedi, past KOTOR, and yet it feels a little bit more like late EU, where everything's established, everything's very specific and similar, right? I mean, look, Ostrander, yeah, Durasema, they do a great job, but that book, I don't know, it just landed in the weird place where it's like they kind of were indebted to whatever was kind of going on with this, what's one of Star Wars's late 2000s things of like really getting multimedia going at the same time, right? But yeah, I don't know. I'm not a fan of it entirely. I like the comics a little bit more than the book, like Liam, but I don't know where it is really gonna go if it's the same. Like I get the idea that the Force and the challenges of the Force really do push and pull characters, and it's pretty interesting to see like there's always going to be a good or a bad, and it doesn't have to be Jedi Sith. It could, but then they call it Jedi, right? Like okay, like so we're just doing straight up precursors when it could have been very different, right? The whole point of like KOTOR and the connections here are like the Infinite Empire, the Rakutans, and like what's going on there and all that. You could have really explored maybe their society and how it falls to the wayside and more internally while everything else is going on, and you would have still been able to do a very interesting Star Wars story. But I guess they played it a little too safe there. Even if they did something like Tales of the Jedi, where you get to see all the Sith Lords of Korriban and all these different civilizations that don't even realize that the schism of the light and dark Jedi that wanted to leave actually ended up resulting in changing and morphing into that modern Sith that we see permeate all the way into Star Wars Legacy Volume 2, right? So it's a weird choice, and I don't think it was entirely sound. It's fine. I think that's the worst thing about it. It's fine, and then it doesn't. I mean, nothing makes sense timeline wise. Tales of the Jedi feels so much more archaic than KOTOR. 30-year gap. KOTOR to Star Wars: The Old Republic. Sure, they got a little bit more greeblies, a little bit more detail and everything, but suddenly their tech just looks way, way more better than even stuff that we see in like the sequel trilogy. It feels weird that it's even if there is a dark age is coming and or not, there's just some weird things about anything pre the Phantom Menace and anything Old Republic and going back. So and the Dawn of the Jedi really helped in that situation.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I do think it's unfortunate because there was something there. Because it is, I think, I mean, not 20,000 years different,
Yeah.
but very different. It is very different than traditional Star Wars, not in its mythic storytelling, because Star Wars as a hero's journey type of mythic story always plays in loops. But technologically, look, feel, everything is very, very different. So I wish they were given time to really enhance the world, but if you're still there, Battlesai, I highly recommend going and checking out the comics instead if you're interested in that era. Even more so, I know a lot of people who try asked me a lot because I've done a lot of these videos both on this channel and on my other channel about getting into Legends and where to start and all these different things, who all say, I want to read Legends chronologically. And I personally really don't recommend that. I think either release order is better or just go start with Bane, because almost everything else, novels wise, is really, really tied to something else, whether it's Dawn of the Jedi, Into the Void, very tied to the comics. The novels for Old Republic are all tied to the video game. So if you don't play the game or at least watch the trailers, the cinematic trailers, you won't get that much out of the novels. You can still enjoy those much more, I think, than Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void, and most of them are all really good. But still, you have to attach it to that. I think Darth Bane is the main thing that you can really dive into in the earliest part of the timeline without really anything else in the Star Wars EU, and still enjoy it quite a bit. But I think what I always tell people when they want to start the EU is start with Thrawn, because it is the thing. It's like the foundational piece. Even if it wasn't the first EU book, it is the thing that started what the style and the structure of the EU would be. And then after that, start to pick your era. If you want to read Old Republic, you can, but all of that stuff is newer. Despite being the old stuff, it's all newer. So it doesn't necessarily connect as much. It didn't get fleshed out as much. Even the Old Republic books were coming out in like 2010, 11, 12. So that was towards the end of Lucasfilm under George Lucas. Disney was about to buy it. So it is all kind of discombobulated. A lot of the stuff that came out between 2011 and 2014 is just stuff they released because it was already in production. People were already writing the books, they were already writing the comics. It wasn't because they had any real designs to finish these stories. And so a lot of them can feel hollow and empty, or unfortunately kind of disappointing, except for, the one-off books like Plagueis, Kenobi. Those came out in the same time. So I personally don't think going back is the most ideal way for like enjoying the EU. Like, because I think I've recommended to other people they don't start there, just because I think it's a weird enough or difficult enough time period to where, like, if you get bored reading it or you just don't like it and you're not committed, you could jump off and miss a lot of other great stories. Now you might be really
Mhm.
committed, and that's great. You can push through it if you want, but a lot of it is very disconnected. So that's my 2 cents on it. And then Badasai says, I've checked them, still not impressed. I think the lesson is don't leave Lucas out of this era, the dawn of the Jedi. I think he could come up with something crazy and special. I would love to see what he has or his ideas were for the origins of the Jedi. I mean, all connecting to the Wills and some of the stuff they did in Clone Wars and a lot of the things that he wanted in the sequel trilogy. I'd love to see that. I don't think we're going to get it. I think we're going to get an even more simplified version than you saw in the comics and in the book, where it is just like caveman Jedi type of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I would imagine that's the direction they're going. I would love it if they actually do get in touch with George and try to find out some of the things that he thought for the creation of the Force and all of that stuff. Because this isn't from what Dawn of the Jedi is. It's not necessarily creation of the Force and Force cultures. It's the formation of the Jedi, right? So that can be different from what George's original lore around the Force is. So anyway, and then you also said I thought of the chronological order, so I enjoy every connection done in the future books. I don't want to miss out on those. What do you recommend in that sense? Then if you want every connection, I recommend reading a release order because the
Yeah.
EU jumped around, and so you have things constantly that are referencing other things that aren't even in the same timeline. So if you don't want to start with like the 70s Han Solo books and the 80s Lando books, you don't have to, or Splinter of the Mind's Eye. I think you can skip those, even though there will be some connections. But if you start with Thrawn and you read through the 90s stuff, and there will be a lot of bad stuff in there too, you'll at least get most of the references. And then you should be able to kind of connect things because when the EU's really got going in the 90s, where there were no prequels. So a lot of major ideas changed during New Jedi Order in the late 90s that connect back to like what the OT characters are doing with now the new prequel lore. And then there are books like Survivor's Quest that try to justify why Luke and Mara are married. And there are a lot of like plot fixes and all these things that, work their way into stories. So chronologically, is kind of a difficult way to read the EU unless you're willing to have those like kind of holes in like a reference, and then eventually you get them later. So I know I went on for a long time about that, but it is the EU is really difficult to get into. I think honestly, chronological reading order, even though you have to read a lot of bad stuff sometimes towards the beginning, it's the most worth it if you're interested in getting every single piece of information.
Do you mean chronological or release order there?
Yeah, release order,
Yes. Right. Okay.
chronological release order. Yeah, but
Yeah.
release date.
Right. Right. In real world release. Yeah. Yeah. So, no, I mean, 100% agree. Yeah, it is. It's hard to excavate the EU. Like even right now, we had a fairly successful live on X-Wing, right? Kind of changing our format for Legends Book Club. And it's like it's weird because like there's gonna be some fans that just absolutely love everything Old Republic who will never touch the Bantam era. And now there's a growing number of fans who just love New Jedi Order and they're like, I have to read these Bantam books because it's essential to the books that are
Mhm.
and the plots going on there, right? So even for us, it's like a challenge. Like right now, are we gonna go back and maybe do like a Legends Book Club live about the Thrawn trilogy? Even though technically X-Wing is set before, are we going forward in time? But then are we going to skip some of the X-Wing books that Alston wrote instead of it's a tough choice, right? It is pretty weird, even just like as thinking about it from YouTube terms, like how do you go towards and really dig into the EU in a way that you feel like you remember everything and it becomes worthwhile? Because in some ways you just can't, right? A great example is during the Star Wars Legacy era, we had the Star Wars Vector tie-ins. That takes place Knights of the Old Republic, that takes place in Star Wars Legacy, that takes place in Star Wars Dark Times, and it features the same characters and artifact and all that. And it works because it's mostly self-contained and you can read that. But there are authors who write something set 5,000 years before A New Hope, and then they'll mention that in the last series with Luke and Ben and everybody. It's like, how do you make sense of it remembering all those details when it's spread out like that? Like you have to use almost like Wikipedia and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, release really does help because yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point that you put there. Critical Thinker, Tapcap Transmissions kind of has thought this through. Yeah, no, I've seen a lot of what their order is, but we also have to consider what some people on the channel are looking for, right? Like you're reading Legacy of the Force right now, someone might be reading something totally else. We don't know which way to lean, which way we want to talk about. That's kind of the crazy thing about the EU. There's so much to it. It's hard to really read something, stick with it, and then be like, "Oh, wait, what do you mean like this is being referenced in a book set 600 years later?" It's always zigzagging. It's so difficult to keep track of.
Yeah, and that's why I really think because it's so vast and broad and there's so much variation in quality across the EU, like, canon, we've talked a lot about how canon stories are relatively uninspired 95% of the time, but there's a, kind of a consistent commitment to high mediocrity or mediocrity, right? Like there aren't too
Yeah.
many canon books that are absolutely disasters. Um, but there are a handful of legends books that can make you go, "Why am I reading this?" and but there are also equally amount, if not more, definitely more books that will make you go, "Wow, this is incredible. I love the continuity. I love how much they've kept everything connected and how this random thing I read in Crystal Star is now connecting to New Jedi Order." So yeah, there's a lot of enjoyment out of the massive continuity. There can also be times where you're like, "I just want to skip this." So
Yeah.
I that's why I encourage everybody just start with a Thrawn trilogy. If you like that and you want more stories with Han, Luke, and Leia, keep going and read in release order from the Bantam era through New Jedi Order, through Darkness, through Legacy, and then through Fate of the Jedi. Um, if you get tired of that, you can easily go back after Thrawn trilogy and read some of the prequel era stories. You could read Outbound Flight, which connects to Thrawn's origins. You can read some of the other prequel stuff that just connects to the movies if you want to. You can go back and do Bane, which you don't need really any other information for Bane. One of the only ones I preface and say it's better if you know a lot about the EU, but you don't have to have read a lot of the EU, is Plagueis. I think it's much better if you know, because there's so many references. It's a very dense book, came out towards the end of the EU, references so many things, but you can still enjoy the story not knowing that stuff. You just won't get the references, right? So
Yeah.
I think the Ron trilogy is the origin point for me for the EU, even though it's not the first. If you like it, keep going with the Han, Luke, and Leia characters, or skip the ones like you can, go on Goodreads or something and see, okay, this one, Goodreads is generally favorable to almost every Star Wars book. If one's got like a 3 or somewhere between like a 3.1 or less, you could probably skip it. It's not very good. And right now, I can just tell you the Callista trilogy, you can skip. Crystal Scar, you can skip.
What?
You can, there are certain ones if you want an abridged version I think you can skip, but chronologically it's tougher in EU than it is in canon. If you do canon chronologically, most canon books are standalone anyways, so I think you can enjoy that a little more. Um, but the EU changes so much over the course of Star Wars because it's like it's hard to think back. I know we've said a bunch of times on this tonight's stream we're prequel kids. Basically, since we knew Star Wars, there were prequels, right? I was born before the prequels started, but I didn't. I was like a couple of years old when the Phantom Menace came
Yeah.
out. So,
Yeah.
since I was a Star Wars fan, we've had at least one prequel, and so the prequels and that world and the rules have been a part of Star Wars for me forever. But there was a time for a lot of people when Jedi were married, when Jedi were like Green Lanterns, where they were the guardians of their planets and or like a sector, and not stationed on Coruscant, right? There were all these different continuity things that are very different when you read the 90s than when you read the prequel era stuff and later. So there's certainly, I think, reading in release order will certainly help. But I think that's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our Skeleton Crew coverage and for your support tonight. We appreciate the super chats. And again, vote in the polls. We have quite a few of you. Most of you have already voted in the polls and say that you can make both or at least make one of the days. So we are planning on covering it. Again, we'll be online for sure next week. I think New Year's we'll try to figure out how long, but I think a good we'll be on for a good hour or so next week. So make sure you join us. We'll see how it goes. If there's less people that show up, we'll probably call it sooner. If there are a bunch of people that show up, we'll try to leg it out as much as possible. I know I have family commitments that night, but um, we'll shift it around so that we can, make the most out of it. But yeah, hopefully you guys join us. If you haven't voted in yet in the poll, vote. If you're watching this after, I don't know if you can vote in the poll after or not. If you can, great, vote. If you can't, comment. Let us know. Can you make it for Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve streams for Skeleton Crew? Because we want to know how long and what way to plan them. Keep an eye out for predictions coming soon. Check out, we've posted a lot of stuff recently. We've just shifted around shorts. Shorts are going to start coming out now every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. So keep an eye out for shorts those days. And then stay tuned for predictions. They come out every Sunday. Post a lot of videos. Last week I posted like a low lights, basically highlight edited package of the holiday special. You can check that out if you're interested in the holiday special. It was a lot of fun. I thought it was a pretty good video. You can also check out some reviews we've had recently. We have a review finally of what's it even called at this point? The latest High
Tears,
Republic book, Tears of the
Tears of the
Nameless. Yeah,
Nameless.
that
Yeah.
one is coming out soon. But before that, we're going to release a tier list culminating with that book. About every canon book ranked. We do this every year as one of our last videos of the year. It'll be December's tier list. So a lot of you guys seem to enjoy that video. It's going to be updated. That will be out Friday for you guys to check out. So check that out. If you're interested in more content, more live streams, more perks, more additions to your Star Wars Lads experience, check out our Patreon and YouTube membership programs. A lot of great things on there that will help you continue to interact with and enjoy Star Wars Lads even more, including early videos, extra content, voting in the topics of our different shows, including Legends Book Club, choosing the next book we go with, choosing the tier list topics, except for ones that are like set like this one. So yeah, you get to choose a lot of stuff. Go over there if you're interested, and then check out the polls every day, twice a day, all year long. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining tonight, everybody. Hopefully we see you next week. Have a great rest of your night, and we will see you all next time.